Yes?
5 minutes, Mr. McKellen.
All right, thank you. All the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players. They have their exits and their entrances. And one man in his time plays many parts. His acts being 7 ages. First, the infant, mewling and puking in the nurse's arms. And then the whining schoolboy with his satchel and shining morning face creeping like snail, unwillingly to school. And then the lover sighing like furnace with a woeful ballad made to his mistress' eyebrow. And then a soldier, full of strange oaths and bearded like the pard. Jealous in honor, sudden and quick in quarrel, seeking the bubble reputation even in the cannon's mouth. And then the justice, in fair round belly with good capon lined, with eyes severe and beard of formal cut, full of wise saws and modern instances. And so he plays his part. The 6th age shifts into the lean and slippered pantaloon, with spectacle on nose and pouch on side. His youthful hose well saved, a world too wide for his shrunk shank, and his big and manly voice turning again towards childish treble, pipes and whistles in his sound. Last scene of all that ends this strange, eventful history is second childishness and mere oblivion, sans teeth, sans eyes, sans taste, sans everything.
Tony Award-winning actor Ian McKellen, when he is home, lives in the old Chinatown area of East London called Limehouse. From the deck of his flat overlooking the Thames, with the Tower Bridge in the distance, he views tugboats, swooping birds and swans, and can say, "I think what is marvelous about London is all of this, and that Olivier lives here." We'll be right back with award-winning actor Ian McKellen. Ian McKellen is with us. Welcome. Welcome to Canada.
Thank you.
Welcome to Toronto. I suppose I should ask you, what has taken you so long?
To get here?
Yes.
I don't know, and I must confess, I don't have a very strong image of Canada. When I drove into Toronto last Sunday, Monday morning actually, 3 o'clock in the morning, there was nothing I was looking out for. There was no landmark that I was hoping to recognize. And yet, now I've been here for 2 or 3 days, I feel utterly at home. I don't know, it's a very alluring place, this city, for Englishmen who like America, because it's a wonderful blend of the, it seems to me, at early viewing, of the best of both. I don't know. But why? I don't know. It isn't easy, you know, for English actors to work abroad. But coming here doing this one-man show, I had to present to your immigration department all sorts of letters of recommendation.
But then you had the precedent, Ian, of having done that in New York City so that you could win a Tony Award.
Yes, I see. Well, of course, New York is very welcoming to English actors because they love English plays, and if they can get the English actors over with them, then they feel doubly happy. But Canada perhaps has a more lively sense of being in the same tradition as English theatre, but having their own homegrown talent, and perhaps it's less easy for foreigners to come here. I don't know. But there's nothing personal in it, and I promise you, I've only been here for 2 weeks, but I want to come back.
Was there never an occasion when your friend and colleague, Robin Phillips, was the artistic director of the Stratford Festival of Canada, that he didn't discuss, appeal, or suggest roles you might be doing at Stratford, Canada?
No, there wasn't. I only worked with him as an actor when we were both actors on television in England, and very briefly. No, I have been asked on other occasions to come and work at Stratford, Ontario, and it's never been possible.
Was it during Michael Langham or John Hirsch?
It was John Hirsch, I think, and...
or Jean Gascon, also.
Well, it could have been both, because the invitation came with quite a few years in between. I'm not sure I would want to come and intrude, really. As I say in my show, I think, on the whole, local actors should do plays for their local audiences. I think it's very difficult when actors work abroad. I think they can go and present something which they care very much about, which is theirs, they feel is very personal to them. But I don't think actors on the whole are international people. I'm talking about actors who work in the theatre. They must be able to relate very strongly to the audience. And I feel that I belong in London, where I live, and the sort of plays I want to do are plays that I hope Londoners will want to see. And being a Londoner myself now, I feel I can judge that better. It's very difficult, and I feel very nervous about travelling abroad, unless it's just with something that's already a part of me, and I wouldn't want to spend my life bobbing about here and there and everywhere delivering the gospel. I mean, it's not really my style, that.
Well, in terms of delivering the gospel, your friend Alec McKellen's doing rather well with that himself. But when you say, you have a line in acting Shakespeare, and you say at one point, I'm paraphrasing because I don't remember the exact words, you do say something that sounds like, and I do believe the actor should go on the road.
Yes.
You saying on the road at home only?
That's really what I'm thinking of, yes. I mean, there are areas of even our tiny little country, Britain, where people aren't in touch with the theatre in the way that they are if they live in London. There are plenty of regional theatres, of course, in Britain, but there are lots of villages and indeed cities which don't always get the very best of theatre. And I do like to go on the road in England, but then I feel that's my sort of parish. You know, I know how English people think and feel, and I know their expectations, and I know how to surprise them. I know how to sometimes trip them up. I know how to indulge them. I know a great deal about them, and it's an actor, of course, can in the theatre is doing it for that audience who is there that night. And one of the problems of doing a play, say, at Stratford-upon-Avon, where Shakespeare was born and where there's an annual festival of his plays, and other plays too, is that a large majority of the audience will not speak the English language, which is pretty tricky when you're doing Shakespeare. A lot of them may never have been to the theatre before and may know nothing about English life. And so I find it very bewildering as to know how to act for those people. To get a homogeneous audience, of which you do the minute you get away from the festival theatres and you arrive in a small town somewhere where everybody shares a life and an awareness of what life is, to arrive in that community and to feel as I can in a small country like Britain that I know what that community is like. After all, I was brought up in the provinces in the north of England. Then I think an actor can really get down to work, and it's sometimes a bit bewildering to be in London's West End, the commercial theatre, where again the audience is made up of tourists, to wonder quite what you're doing there. It's different when you're in the subsidised theatre where the audience is on the whole local, British, and I'm at the service of people who are rather like me, I feel.
When you say being away from home and acting for those people, that you have the question as the artist of acting for those people, does that lead one to believe that your acting differs from country to country? In the last 2 years of your life, you've been in a number of the major capitals of the world. Are you a different actor in Paris than you are in London?
Well, having said this, that I feel my main job is to stay at home, I do then do quite a bit of travelling.
You certainly do.
Well, that's simply because I do like getting away and having a look what other people are up to. You know. And at least with this show, this Acting Shakespeare show, I feel I'm on my own home ground. And of course, on the whole, the audiences I play to are familiar with the plays I'm talking about and dealing with. Do I alter my acting depending where I am? Well, certainly when I did the show in Paris, I used to do a lot of the linking material in French. I didn't translate Shakespeare. But on the whole, I only speak English and a tiny bit of French. So, yes, I think in New York, I do tend to speak a little bit more slowly and say slowly, which the Americans do. I put on a tiny bit of an American accent. No one's ever really noticed, but it amuses me to do that. I am aware that in New York, at any rate, there's a high level of flamboyance in the theatre. I think Al Pacino was working on Broadway when I was last there, and that man can produce more energy in half a second than I can in the whole of an evening, it seems to me. And that's what American audiences like. I know they think they also like the restrained English style, but I think I'm going out there and I'm about to burst. I'm giving so much energy, and they say, oh, he's so restrained, he's so polite in his acting. So I do try to amend it a little bit. But it's very difficult to know quite what to do. And that's why last night when I opened in Toronto, I was sweating in the dressing room. I really didn't know what to expect or what all these strangers would feel. And it's a great relief when halfway through the show you think, oh, I see. I'm relaxing now because the audience is enjoying themselves, but you can never quite be sure it's going to work. It's quite nice to put yourself on the line, though, and risk and behave dangerously, but I wouldn't like to do it all my life.
All right. On that, we will take a commercial break and be right back with Ian McKellen right after this. Ian McKellen is with us. We have been talking about acting Shakespeare. I was watching you take a sip of water from that cup, and I was just wondering, did you, by any chance, bring your Princess Grace Barbara Streisand glass to Canada? And where is it, if not, Mr. McKellen? Where have you packed it away?
Now, wait a minute. What have I done with that? Oh, I know what I've done with it. You're referring to when I was doing Amadeus, I think, on Broadway, and Princess Grace, the late Princess Grace, who, when I very first did acting Shakespeare at the Edinburgh Festival, I walked out onto the stage of a tiny little theatre, only 200 people in a little hall at the festival there, and on the front row was Princess Grace and her son and Burt Lancaster. And I'd never done the show before. You can imagine what I was like. I was a nervous wreck. And when I came to Richard II, a part I've played 100 times and dried in the middle, forgot my words, another actor, Richard Pascoe, who was currently playing Richard II at Stratford, kindly prompted me. It was that sort of evening. I had supper with the princess afterwards and found we had a lot in common, namely a love of the theatre, basically. And I, alas, never took up her invitation to go and do the show in Monaco, but when I did it again in New York, she was there. And the glass she had drunk out of in the dressing room I kept as Princess Grace's glass, and when Barbara Streisand later came to see the show with her husband, she too drank out of the same glass. I made sure of that. I then marked it with a little eyebrow pencil, BS I think I put on rather than PG, and kept it for my accountant in London, who is besotted with Barbara Streisand and would much rather talk about her than about my tax problems. And so when I went back after a year in England, earning myself some money, and of course him some money, I gave him the glass as Barbara Streisand's glass, and it's now being used on his dining table, I suppose. It's not mine anymore.
You know, one of the things that I must compliment you on, and because of, originally, through the now defunct CBS cable, we were able to see The Promise.
Oh, really?
Well, did you do it on tape with Judi Dench and Ian McShane, or was it? No. You had taped that?
It was before, sort of middle 60s, before plays in England were regularly put on videotape, and that was actually filmed.
Oh, it was filmed?
And Judy wasn't in it. It was another young actress, and it never got shown in England. I don't think it's ever been seen there. It never got released in the cinemas, which is what it was intended for. So if it turned up on...
So CBS cable had it all.
Yes.
Plus there were 2 productions you had taped that were seen on CBS cable.
What of? You don't know.
I thought one of them... Was there a Hamlet put on tape?
Oh, yes, Hamlet, yes.
Put on tape.
And Macbeth, probably.
And Macbeth was put on tape. Now, are you...
No, they were both on tape, yes.
That's right.
Now, the Macbeth I was very, very, very pleased with indeed, because that was a small production, a small theatre for the Royal Shakespeare Company. Trevor Nunn, the greatest director in the world, had directed it. Judi Dench, one of the greatest actresses, played Lady Macbeth. and I was playing Macbeth. And Roger Rees, who's now sprung to stardom as Nicholas Nickleby and is currently playing Hamlet in Stratford, England, was playing Malcolm. It was a wonderful cast. And we were able to put it on tape. And I don't know if you've ever seen the BBC television Shakespeare's in Canada. I know you have, because many Canadians have said how little they enjoyed them. Fortunately, I'm not in any of them, so that's all right. But this Macbeth, Trevor said to us he wanted to photograph the text. Well, he didn't mean literally the words being photographed by the camera, but he meant that there were going to be no distractions of scenery or of elaborate costumes or properties or effects. And we did it in the studio, as small as this one, with just some black surrounds, which never really registered on the camera. And there was changes of light and mood behind the characters' faces, but on the whole it was all done in close-up and deep shadows. And because it was a production we'd been doing in the theatre for 2 years, we could move into a studio in 6 days. We recorded that from scratch, and we were able to adjust our movements to ½ a centimetre to fit in with the very elaborate, no, not elaborate, simple but precise lighting. And I think Trevor achieved his end, which was to let Shakespeare's words spring out of the actor's mouth and make immediate contact with the camera. And of course, doing Shakespeare in front of a camera is very good, because when you get to those soliloquies, those moments when Shakespeare's characters are left alone on the stage in the theatre and talk directly to the audience, of course, the camera's there. The camera becomes the audience. And it's not an unsettling thing for an audience at home. They're used to newsreaders, sportscasters talking directly to them. And so I could speak all of those soliloquies and say directly to the audience, if it were done, when it is done, then will it be done quickly? What do you think about it? And some communication was possible, and I hope that Macbeth will always be shown, because it's a wonderful example of how Shakespeare can survive transference to a modern media like TV.
There's not a contradiction when you tell an audience in a theater where you have a proscenium that they are the audience from audio and not spectators, as in sitting at home in front of the box.
Well, my own preference is always for the theatre, and Shakespeare wrote for the theatre, and I don't think, speaking as a theatre-goer rather than as an actor, that there's anything can match the thrill of being with a group of people who are as excited about an event as I am myself, and are really communicating with what's happening on stage, if it's working. And I don't say it works more than once every 30 shows that you see, whether they're musicals or pantomimes or Shakespeare, it doesn't matter what it is. There's nothing, for my money, can match that. And but if it's got to be done on TV and reach places where people can't readily go to the theatre, perhaps can't afford to go to the theatre, then it's a very good substitute if it's done very well.
All right, on that we will take another commercial break. Thank you. Be right back with Ian McKellen. Ian McKellen is with us. You have been talking about a number of things and actors involved. When you tell the story, it's always wonderful to read about someone who is called great and described as the actor of his generation, and to read that you have a distinct attitude toward superlatives. And it interests me because I remember Kate Nelligan's story of the young woman from Canada who went to London to be the actor she has become, and was being called this and that, and she accosted a critic one evening at a party and absolutely ripped him to shreds over his superlatives and said at one point, "How dare you do this to me?" Yes. She thought it was a terrible burden that someone was calling her the finest young actress in London. Yes. And I think you share some of this. You read them.
I must say I have a lively interest in publicity, and of course she's a film actress now where publicity comes very easily. It doesn't come very easily to theatre people. You know, I can walk down the street in London and nobody knows who I am, and very few people care. In New York, it's quite different. Everyone knows who you are. When I got back from doing Amadeus for a year on Broadway, winning the Tony, taking Lena Horne and Elizabeth Taylor out of my arm for an evening. I went back to London after a year of all that heady stuff, and people said, "Where have you been? Have you been ill?" So any publicity I can get, I grab in England, and if that involves people saying ridiculous things about me, well, I take it. It doesn't seem to be referring to me. It could be a burden, I suppose, if then the audience expected to see something earth-shattering, because not every performance is that. But it's just, if people say you're the young Gilg or the young Olivia, it's just a shorthand for saying that they've enjoyed your performance very much, indeed. And I've got my share of bad notices, so when the good ones come along, I'm very happy to read them.
As long as you brought that up, and since you were quick to respond to your friend Diana Rigg, while she was compiling her witty book, No Turn Unstoned, wasn't it Harold Hobson on the BBC who got one of your favorite? I assume
it's not my favorite, and
why did you give it to Diana Rigg?
I didn't give it to her. I wrote a rather snooty letter and said, "Do you think why should I publicise my bad reviews?" However, since no one's going to actually watch this programme, I don't mind repeating it to you. It's Harold Hobson, a very distinguished critic who's been my champion for many a long year, actually said of my Hamlet that the best part of the performance was my curtain call. I suppose for him it was a relief that the show was actually over. But what I got out of that, you see, you can always get something good out of bad circumstances, but he had some sense that I was not working with good enough actors. It wasn't true. I've always wanted to work with the best people in the world, and have turned down jobs because I didn't think the conditions were absolutely right, but spurred on by this view of me that I was somehow avoiding being compared with very good actors who I would be working with. As a result of his impression of my Hamlet, I started a company, or with others, started a company called the Actors Company, in which all the actors were hopefully of a high standard, playing small parts as well as big parts.
Now I know you mean it when you say you've learned more from the people who don't like you than you have from praise.
It's true, I think, yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
You're welcome. Do you enjoy being interviewed? Is it a pleasurable experience for you as an actor?
Well, I thought before I became an actor that I might become a chef, and then I gave that up, and I thought I might become a journalist, and I suppose you're an example of a modern journalist, and so I'm always interested in an interviewer's technique and so on. And I sometimes like it when I've only got 2 minutes and I've got to try and sell a show and mention the name of the theatre, the Royal Alexander Theatre in Toronto, and get things in very quickly. Acting Shakespeare, you'll have a lot of laughs. I do a full range of characters from Juliet to Falstaff to Prince Hal to Hamlet to Macbeth, And then a more leisurely thing like this, I find some satisfaction in speaking in sentences, making sure there's a verb there somewhere. And not rambling too far off the point, as I probably am doing now. Do you want to ask me the next question?
Well, that explains the enthusiasm for journalism, but are you a good chef? Do you have a well-equipped kitchen in the Limehouse section of East London?
Well, if it is well-equipped, the fridge isn't always full, and I tend to do things in spurts. I cook snacks, but weekends that a group of friends will come around, and I can cook a pretty good roast, but traditional English. I like puddings most, you see. I'm quite good at puddings, apple crumble, trifle, jellies.
You're proving where you live and where you're from. Did this start in Bolton? Was your father a good cook?
No.
No?
No, my mother was as good as mothers should be. Very good.
Was your father
I don't know why I got into the kitchen. But really, fate pointed the finger and said, theatre, theatre, theatre. It was just, couldn't keep away from it. But both my parents, nonconformist northerners, had a rather lively distrust of the cinema as being something that nasty things could happen in the dark. Whereas in the theatre, where there's a lot of light coming from the stage, people behaved in a slightly better way. They thought, I don't know. But anyway, they went to the theatre a lot, and I used to go with them, and that's how it began. So I'm very grateful to them for that. Though neither of them was interested in performing.
But your father did play piano.
Yes,
he said there were always a lot of books in the house.
Yes, that's true. Oh, yes, I had a fabulous background from that point of view. But and fitting in with that, the fact that I went to the late lamented grammar school in Bolton. And grammar schools don't really exist anymore now that the state has taken over with comprehensive education, which has its advantages. But the school I went to encouraged people to follow their own specialty, and it was almost as good to be playing the lead in the school play as it was to be, say, being captain of the second 11 at cricket, not the first 11, of course. But theatre was considered to be important, and Mum was encouraged in that, and I did an awful lot of acting at schools. And so I'm very glad that that fitted in with my parents' attitude to life, that if you could do something, and you knew you could do it, then it was your duty to do it well. And before my mother died, when I was only 13 or 14, she had said to her sister that she wouldn't mind if I became an actor because actors gave so much enjoyment to people. And really that's, I think, what I'm about. I'm still trying to live up to that hope from my mother, who never actually saw me act professionally.
What does it mean to you when you hear terms like actor's actor? Is there such a thing? I hear actors say it about you. You are an actor's actor.
Really?
Yes, really.
What does it mean?
After the audience you had last night and the audiences you have attracted, beyond the world of academia where you're in a university setting, and one assumes a large proportion of the audience are undergraduates with enthusiasm in theater, to be in a professional theater out of that context and to know that you have everyone who could get there that evening, from Stratford, Canada, the Shaw Festival, every local actor who could get into the theater.
It was wonderful. It was wonderful. Edward Atienza came round, and I saw Edward Atienza at Stratford in England playing a dwarf in All's Well That Ends Well. He spent the whole evening on his knees. I shall never, ever forget it. He bounced around the stage and was so utterly convincing. And to have him come into the dressing room last night and having enjoyed my show, it was thrilling. Well, actor's actor, what does it mean? I suppose there are certain actors whom the public isn't too well aware of, who actors adore. In England, there was such an actor called Wilfrid Lawson, who used to drink too much, but he was an overwhelming actor. I happily worked with him once, just on the radio before he died. And he didn't seem to care about fame or success, and didn't have much of either. And but every actor in London knew who Wilfrid Lawson was, and he was everyone's hero, really. And there are so many actors who never hit the headlines, who are workmanlike, who devote themselves to their job, who do it extremely well, and perhaps who don't have any side of their nature which is glamorous, aren't perhaps particularly good-looking or beautiful, and but are always there. And we know that Michael Hordern is such an actor. Well, now, late in his life, he's become extremely famous. Indeed, he's just been knighted by the Queen, and so he's now the public's actor. But if I'm thought of as an actor's actor, if that meant that I wasn't the public's actor, then I would be sorry, but otherwise I don't really know what it means.
When you speak that way about acting, and one thinks of the boy you were, who stood in line all night, or as you have said on occasion, slept all night to be there the next morning to purchase tickets to see Peggy Ashcroft, Laurence Olivier, John Gielgud.
Well, Peggy, oh dear. I saw her do Imogen. A young girl in Cymbeline, wonderful play, fairy story, Cymbeline, one of his late plays, and she must have been 52 or something, and she was playing this girl of 18. And I was right at the back of the theatre, because that's where I used to stand. 2 and 6, it cost half a crown. And I just totally fell in love. She just had an utter radiance. I only met it again, this experience of a mature woman, utterly convincing as a young girl, when I saw Margot Fonteyn dance Juliet very late in her life. I made the mistake on that occasion of getting a heavy pair of opera glasses and seeing suddenly I was watching an old lady, and I took them down immediately because the silhouette was something much more delicate and youthful. Yes, well, I remember the boy that I was then, and there was no way I was ever going to be up there with them or match their achievement. But if, you know, I'm going out onto the stage on a Wednesday matinee and still the eyes aren't quite open and the house isn't going to be full, and I think, what the hell am I doing this for? I think, well, there's a young lad up in the balcony, or girl, who's never been to the theatre before, and now's my opportunity. I could just change their lives today by making them fall in love with it all as I did. So the spirit of the little boy is always there in the audience. I keep thinking about him.
Easier to do as an actor, Ian, than as a chef.
Yes, yes, and of course the food that Shakespeare gives you is much more nourishing in the end than the food we eat on the plate.
On that, we will take a commercial break and be right back with Ian McKellen. Ian McKellen is with us, and you have been talking about theatre, Shakespeare, people in the theatre. I wonder, not only because of the Antoinette Perry Award, the Tony Award, and those awards you were collecting three or four consecutive years in London, the Best Actor Award. What's important is you were collecting them. Did Milos Forman or anyone from Orion Films call you or your agent saying, we're getting ready to do the film of Amadeus?
No.
You never met
No.
with Milos Forman at all?
Well, I met him when he came to see Amadeus because he's a good friend of Peter Schaffer's and the author, but it was quite clear and understandable that being his own man, his view of the Amadeus story would be perhaps not related either to the play and certainly not to people who had been involved in the play. He wanted to be in charge of his own view of it, and so I think it would have been very unlikely if he'd had anybody who had been in the original. Although, strangely, there are people. The original Mozart, Simon Callow, is in the film somewhere, but he's not playing Mozart. And Nicholas Kepros, who played the Emperor so wonderfully on Broadway, is also in the movie, playing another part. But I didn't play Salieri, but nor did Paul Schofield, nor did John Wood, nor did Frank Langella, so...
When you originated the role in London with Martin Sherman in Bent, is it true that you knew while you were preparing to do this in London that a deal had been made in New York and Richard Gere would do the New York version?
Yes, I did know that. It was... I was on tour with the Royal Shakespeare Company playing Toby Belch in Twelfth Night. I can play fat parts on occasion. And Andre and the Three Sisters, another fat man. And a friend sent me this script out of the blue and said, I wonder what you think of this play. It was Bent. And I didn't read it for about 3 months. I didn't have time, or perhaps less than that. 3 weeks. And I read it and instantly liked it. Showed it to a friend who said, you must do that play, it's absolutely wonderful. Then there was a long gap, and I waited till the end of that tour and said, what is this play? Who's going to do it? Why can't we do it in London? And during that time, I think Martin Sherman had lost hope of anyone ever doing it in England. He'd sent it to a number of actors and directors who'd all turned it down. And the man who'd sent it to me happened to be a director and said, well, if you like it, I think probably we could do it in England. And so we did, but the Broadway production was already set up. There didn't seem any reason why we shouldn't do it in England if the author was willing. And it being an American play, written by an American, all the rhythms were American, it would have been perverse, I think, if a group of, or even one English actor had gone and played it on Broadway. You remember the trick of the opening scene, which seems to be taking place in modern day, the modern world, and seems to be in whatever country the play is taking place, whether it's England or America. It's only at the end of that scene you realise the play is actually set in Berlin in 1933, 4, 5. And So if it was going to be done in New York, obviously it should be convincingly New York accents that one was hearing, and equally in London should be English actors. So I never felt any proprietary control over the part, and I'm sorry it's never been filmed, and perhaps if it were filmed, I would like very much to do it, and I'm amazed it hasn't been filmed. I think it would make a wonderful, wonderful movie.
There was a plan at one point. Fassbinder was going to do a film version of it.
He was, and then he went off the idea, and then Costa Gavros was going to do it, and after the film Missing, which was a huge success, he decided he'd do something else. So anyone with a bit of money and a lively sense of what's possible and a bit of daring should pick that script up. It's been a hit all over the world, you know. It's recently played in Israel. And I know some Jews didn't like the play because they felt there was too much attention being given to the persecution of homosexuals in Nazi Germany. And but of course the Nazis persecuted so many people, not just Jews and gays, but gypsies and politicians and Catholics, priests, that this was the story of just one group. And however, the Israelis have taken to Bent with enormous enthusiasm and recognized in the story of the persecution of gays that, of course, it is just an example of fascism, and the Jews were only one group who were mindlessly persecuted.
When I ask you about Milos Forman or any of Saul's aunts or the executives who've made the film of Amadeus approaching you to recreate Salieri, I also think of the sequence of disillusionment you felt in film, whether one goes back to Alfred the Great or the comments you've made about working with Sandy Dennis, and thank you all very much, which weren't very positive. But perhaps it goes all the way back to the night that Tony Richardson got you drunk on gin, and at the end of the evening promised you were about to star in the film version of Ned Kelly. So you took yourself
You're a
off.
wonderful interviewer. You make me feel as if we've known each other for years, and I know we've only just met once before this occasion. Well, yes, he did get me drunk on gin, and I'm extremely grateful to him because I've never touched gin since, as a result.
Really?
Yes, but, well, he offered me the part of Ned Kelly, and he said, of course, Ned Kelly, the Australian hero, was a tough boy, and he was a boxer, and you've got to go and build your body up, and I did. I went to put some 2 inches around each biceps, which you can do rather quickly, actually. And then I learned how to ride horse. And just one day when I was in the gym going through this preparation, I picked up a newspaper and read that Mick Jagger was going to play Ned Kelly, which he did do. He didn't put any muscles on his biceps. I don't think he ever rode a horse. And much as I admire Mick Jagger in other situations, he wasn't very good in the film, and I think I would have been better. Many actors would have been better. So, yes, I regret I've never done more films. I began to think that I was no good at film acting. It is different from theatre. Boring to hear actors go on as to why it's different, but it is. And I always enjoy filming. I know a film I made for British television called Walter, about a mentally handicapped man, was shown in Canada. I was very, very pleased with that, and that proved that I could act in front of film. And I'm still waiting to hear that I may have the chance to be in the film of Plenty, which Canadians won't be pleased to know is going to star Meryl Streep rather than Kate Nelligan. But if they can organise the schedule so I can do it and fit it in with my responsibilities at the National Theatre, I will get to spend 3 days filming with my heroine, Meryl Streep. And so films have not entirely left me behind.
I think it's ironic that we're talking about Tony Richardson, Ned Kelly, and the name Mick Jagger has to come up. And yes, I think, never mind Canadians, I think anyone who saw Plenty in London or New York would express disappointment that the play David Hare wrote for Kate Nelligan is being played by a movie star whose name raised the financing to make the movie. As Fred Skepsey, the Australian director, said,
yes.
No Meryl Streep, no financing.
Yes, I can believe
and
that's
Sting
true.
is involved, so you have another rock star.
Yes, and Tracy Ullman, who's another popular singer, is also going to be in it, and also John Gielgud, and maybe me. But and playing the leading man's part in the movie is an actor you probably won't know called Charles Dance, a small bit player at, for the Royal Shakespeare Company who's recently become a big star on a successful television series in England. Well, what am I to do? You know, am I to go out and become famous so I can play all these wonderful parts in movies? Well, I can play these wonderful parts in the theatre without being internationally famous, and you settle for what you can get. There are very few, well, you don't settle for what you can get, you have regrets, but I've no real grumbles. There are very few actors who have an important career in films and on stage.
And your two favorite examples are Albert Finney and Alan Bates.
Well, in my generation, they
Yeah.
do that, but then I dare say there's a corner of their hearts which envies me doing the parts I play in the theatre, which on the whole they don't play as consistently as I do. So the fact that they make more movies than I do is, well, I'm not Alan Bates, I'm not Albert Finney.
Well, if only
I'm
you
Ian
hadn't
McKellen.
said, Ian, that money has always embarrassed you, you wouldn't be in this dilemma. Stop being embarrassed by money.
I'm not embarrassed by money as much as I used to be, because money's bought me a lovely house in Limehouse, which I ought to call Amadeus, actually.
I tell you what, let us take another commercial break and we'll come back and pick up on this. Be right back with Ian McKellen. Ian McKellen is with us. We were talking about film and what has and has not been done on film. I don't think it's ever too late to compliment an actor on something extraordinary. And I realize the commercial fate that befell Priest of Love, but I still feel that you, and through you and Christopher Miles, along with Janet Sussman, who played your Frida, and Ava Gardner, whom you met in a swimming pool in a one-piece bathing suit and said, "My God, it's Ava Gardner coming at me."
It was wonderful.
Didn't you become good friends on that, Ian?
We did. Oh, God, she was wonderful. She lives in London, you know. I'd never met her. She looks back on her Hollywood days, I think, with enormous regret that she didn't do more of what she wanted to do. She always wanted to go into the theatre and was never allowed to, because the studio said, no, you're a star, you can't go and learn how to act in the theatre, which would involve playing small parts. I think she did the movie because Janet and I were established theatre people. And there we were in the depths of Mexico, Oaxaca and Tlacalula, was it called? Fly-blown landscape, but all sharing a caravan. There was one point when she and Janet Sussman and their dressers and Penelope Keith, an English actress, and I think somebody else, were all sharing a tiny little caravan which was used by the entire Mexican crew for their restroom. And there was Ava Gardner lying in the middle of that, covered in flies, and just having a wonderful time, entertaining everybody. She was a real trooper, and so she called up Frank every so often and complained, and I think maybe he got on the phone to the producer, but she was wonderful, and I've not seen her since. She's such a private lady, but I remember that with enormous affection, and my God, can she act in front of the camera, and she doesn't know it. She insists she doesn't know what she's doing.
Have you ever sat down with your friend from Cambridge, Derek Jacobi,
Yes.
and had him thank you for saying that I, Claudius, was rubbish and you turned it down the first time around for TV?
I didn't. I turned down not his part. I knew he was going to play it. I turned down the part of, what's the awful emperor? Caligula. John Hurt played that. You see, yes. The trouble is, if you do Shaw and Stoppard and Shakespeare, and the script arrives out of the blue and it's written by, all right, Jack Pullman, but it's, the words aren't quite as good as what you're used to. You can forget how potent the camera work and the whole presentation can be on television. But that was the reason I turned it down. And no, I don't regret it. And Derek had a wonderful and well-deserved success. Totally changed his career.
Yes?
He'd been doing wonderful work at the National Theatre, and then he became a star.
Well, we shall all try
And
to get
he's-
to London now and see your Coriolanus. How do you
do.
pronounce the play?
Coriolanus. I think.
Coriolanus.
He's the hero of Corioli.
All right.
He's named after the place Coriolis.
Coriolanus.
Coriolanus.
Good fortune with it. And thank you for being here.
Nice to see you.
You're welcome, Philip. Thank you.